All right, I think we're good here. So thank you, everybody, for coming out. This is a great turnout, and it's appropriate because we have a great speaker. Chad's going to be walking us through his solar install that he did himself, beginning to end. I think you started like the beginning of this summer and then just wrapped up this fall. So pretty quick turnaround, pretty successful thing. He's going to walk you through some of the finer details of his panel selections and other things that you might want to consider if you're thinking about doing this yourself, because this information will be very valuable to you. So with that, please welcome Chad.
So this is my actual final thing done, beginning November. I don't recall when I started looking into this. I do remember my permits I was trying to get in the week of the 4th of July, but it kind of, how things get in your head for, that's kind of interesting, down the line to, I'm looking at this more further, and now, I want to do that, let's get the wife spying. So this is going to be the things I'm going to try and go through. Why DIY, some of your incentives, things to consider with the location, sizing of your system, what kind of investment does it turn out to be, all the various components through the panel inverter, connecting to the grid, mounting, regulations, paperwork, installation, inspections, and things that kind of didn't get a whole slide is just other. So for me, why DIY? Well, when I work with professional contractors, I have a very specific vision in mind, and getting them to understand that specific vision at times can be a little difficult, and even if I think we're agreeing, I get home from work the day after they do the work, and you're like, oh. So that's one thing I very much like. Otherwise, professionally installed, when I was evaluating middle of the summer, it's about $3 a watt. I did actually end up getting a quote for a system very similar to what I put in, and their quote was a little more than $3 a watt, but I was getting a couple special things that were not directly contributing to the power output of my system. DIY, about $1.50. I came in, I think, at $1.61 with my current system tally, so very close, but I still had some boutique things in there that I can touch on here later. Like I said before, you get exactly what you want, and while going through this, I did learn many, many new things. So just, it's fun for me. So why I wanted to do it this year, this is the last year for the federal investment tax credit at 30%. So next year, I think it drops down to 26, then 22, and then it phases out completely except for commercial installs. So I was thinking, do it now, get as much payback, but also the cost of solar is decreasing around 5% a year as well, so maybe next year will be just as good of value. It's hard to say where things are going. And that's on the total cost of the system. I'm not a tax attorney on what counts as the cost of the system, but it can be things you rented, tools you had to buy. I've even seen if your roof is old enough that you need a new roof before you put panels on, that could count. Not a tax attorney, but it was very appealing. There also are local incentives that vary per region. RPU has a 50 cent a watt return. I believe this has to be professionally installed though, or at least you have to sit through some energy saving seminars and other things, and it has to pass, I think, a HERS test, et cetera. At the time when I started looking into it, the funds were already gone for this year, and I don't know what the funds are going to be next year. Go ahead.
Solar Connection said they burned through in the first 12 houses.
And talking to Solar Connection, he said he already has a stack of guys lined up for next year that they're going in, I think January 2nd, because that's the first business day of the year, to try to get whatever funds exist for that. So not something I was going to go down, plus the added work of going through the energy efficiency stuff. I was like, I'm just going to do it cheap, and if I have to hire an electrician, it's probably going to cost me more than that 50 cents a watt saves me. Location considerations. Do you have a spot that is actually even going to work? This top picture here is actually my roof. The one with the dot up there, the one below it is a coworker's roof. Both south facing, but you need to consider other houses, trees, what's your orientation, how's it going to work out. South facing is the best. You can do east and west, you're going to have diminished returns, but you need to evaluate your shading and where is it going to fit. With this, very cool, the Google Get Sunroof will do this based on their 3D map renderings. It seems to be pretty accurate for trees and shadowing effects on your roof, for just a fast, quick way to look at it. System sizing. Your generation, again, is going to depend where it's at, not only for shadows, but for where you are in the United States. So Minnesota, the minimum and maximum range is about 3.7 to 4.7 kilowatt hours per square meter. We're a little more south here, but I just did the whole range because Rochester seemed to be in a little blip. When you size, what is your average consumption? Get your utility bills out, add them up, see how much you think you need. How much can you fit? That's actually where I ended up. I was like, I want to put up as much as I can get. I don't have that big of a roof, so I know it's not going to be more than I need. And then there's this other caveat of how much can you net meter? In the state of Minnesota, net metering is selling back to the utility for the same rate you buy. So if you buy at 12 cents a kilowatt hour, you sell back, and your meter doesn't spin backwards, but it counts back towards your bill at the same rate. Other states, I'm originally from South Dakota, does not have net metering, so if you do have a system and a generation agreement, you would sell back to them at whatever their wholesale rate is. So with that, nice big pretty picture of the United States. Minnesota doesn't look so great on that, being as far north as we are. But on a little more granular scale, you can see at least Rochester's in more towards the 4.7 kilowatt hours per meter squared per day. I don't know why on the granular we're actually a little worse. I don't know if it's tree coverage or whatnot, but I don't think this also accounts for weather or cloud cover. This is what's hitting the region, not what's hitting the ground. So you're going to have weather patterns that might make this even worse. So here is my average consumption. I started looking at this in the last bill for utility bill I had was June, so that's where I ended it out at. I need 6,400 kilowatt hours a year, summing up my whole thing. So then I was looking at what can I fit on my roof. I figured I was getting about 24 panels, and that brings me into well over 150% of what I need. But as far as what you would need, depending on where you're at in the state, for 3.7 to 4.7 kilowatt hours, you need 16 or 13 panels, depending on how efficient they are and where you're at in the state. So looking down this, all things constant except for panels and kilowatt hours you'll get per year, depending on various regions. So it's an eye chart, but I just kind of wanted to show some of my work and what I have there. This is actually my layout. I have an ugly roof. I have multiple peaks that line up and come into, so my garage roof peaks into my main back roof, and then it being the front of my house, there is not nice clean spaces, so it was a little bit of a challenge fitting things in, but you get up there with a tape measure and a little bit of plotting paper and you can figure out what you want. A panel here is 40 inches by 65 inches. So a little over 3 feet by 5.5 feet long. So it's 1 by 1.6 meters. There's actually two sizes of panels though. There are 60 cell and 72 cell. I'll get to that in a little bit. Net metering for Minnesota. Like I said before, there's a limit to how much you can sell back. You can have up to a 40 kilowatt AC system. So when I was talking to the professionals, they're saying, if you go above that now, you're hitting the wholesale rate. But as my understanding of this goes, is that is your AC, so you can have as many panels on your roof as you want. It's what you can produce AC. So they even recommend oversizing your inverter, and I'm covering that later. But you could put up to that many on your roof, and some people with large yards or large roofs or machine sheds, why not? Nice green energy. This is kind of interesting for my meter now shows two different meters. They say how much RPU has received and how much they have delivered from me or to me, and it's a delta between the two for my bill. So that's kind of what's illustrating here. If I consume internally and it never gets out to the meter, RPU has no idea I generated that. If I'm overproducing during the day, we're not home and it's a nice sunny day, it'll go out my meter. If I'm home, my wife's doing laundry, it's coming in my meter, even if I'm generating and I have self-consumption. Last I looked on Friday, for the month of November, starting on the 1st, my energy bill is like 40 some kilowatt hours, so about $5 for this month of where I'm at. And I was ahead until it snowed. The snow got on there and I lost a couple days. So other considerations are, how are you going to tie into the grid? And there's a couple ways you can actually tie in before your panel, but they recommend that for a certified electrician or for even you have to have a certified electrician. What I did is called a backfeed breaker. So it actually plugs into a 2-pole spot of my load center in my house, and the energy goes back into the main bus bar. If it's consumed internally by my panel, it never gets out to the grid. Otherwise, if I have a low load, it will flow out from there. One thing interesting to consider with this is you have your main circuit breaker at the top. That's going to stop how much current you can get on your bus bar. Well, now you have a secondary point of energy coming in. So you could actually consume more than your panel is designed for. So there are some safety considerations and permits associated on that, and I can touch on that later if people are interested. I did look into backup energy and battery storage. I was approaching this as an investment and payback period. Now, I don't have a need for medical or other things to not have the power go out on me, so it would just be convenience to have the battery backup. They make systems that have the sinusoidal generator in to make an AC wave in the inverter for the DC to AC side. They're a couple $100 more, but then the big cost is the battery. The battery for this was about $6,000, and it's not an investment, it's just an outage prevention, because we don't have peak load pricing where I want to shed some of my consumption or things like that. So it really wasn't worth looking into the battery too much further for me. And then on top of that, if you have a battery that can source 5 kilowatts of power, you can't even run your AC on it, so you have to rewire your home for a peak load pricing or have multiple batteries, which just did not interest me. The investment side, the payback period and the rate of return. My total system is $12,000, 30% tax credit, so it's $8,400 is what I'm considering my cost. Haven't gotten that money back yet, but I have enough confidence in the US government that I'll probably get it. Annual savings at 9,200 kilowatt hours, 12 cents a kilowatt hour, I'm looking at about $1,100 a year, average of just under $100 a month. So just 8,400 over 1,100, 7.6 years. I normally think of that as a pretty good investment if I'm under a 10-year period. My ROI, same math, 230%, assuming $1,100 worth of energy for 25 years minus my $8,400 cost. No, looked pretty good on paper when I started getting into it. I'm not that big of a finance guy, but another guy goes, well, you really should do a net present value. So let's look at what my investment's worth against just putting that in the stock market. Same kind of numbers, $8,400, $1,100 a year. I did throw in an inflation rate of 2% for utilities, which seems relatively fair depending on where you're at. And then another thing to consider is your panels aren't going to produce as much at year 20 as they produce at year 1. Mine are warranted to have 80% of the output at year 25. So just averaging that out, it's 0.8% a year. So I actually factored that into my $1,100 worth of power plus inflation. So my net present value, assuming I can invest it somewhere else and get 6% back, this is still worth $13,000. That looked pretty good to me. And even if I say I can get 10% somewhere else, it's still worth 10 grand. And that's after paying for everything. So I'm gonna do that. That seems pretty fair to me. So the higher you can get back somewhere else, the less you make here, but I like being diversified, and I'm pretty sure I'm always gonna need energy at my house. Into the components considerations. There's lots of different panel types and lots of different panel manufacturers. You've got monocrystalline panels, which is, if any of you guys work in the silicon fabrication stuff, you have one cell that makes a single die for your crystal. It's a little bit more efficient. You get more power density, it's slightly more expensive, and they're a black cell. So when you look at stuff, if you see blue cells in a big installation, that's a polycrystalline. My roof is all black, it's a monocrystalline. The polycrystalline, less power dense, but less expensive, have the blue color. Again, I was space limited. I'm going for how much I can fit with reasonable increases in price. The next thing down there is how big are these panels? There's 60 and 72 cell, depending on your orientation. I could fit the 60 cells better, and as far as non-commercial utility install levels, there's more variance of panels to choose at the 60 cell size. So a 60 cell panel is 1.6 by 1 meter, a 72 is 2 meters by 1 meter. So just how much can you handle? My panels are 40, 42 pounds a piece. Not terrible, but they're more like a wind sail to even haul around. Efficiency. Your panel efficiency is going to go all over the board. You can get some LGs that are in excess of 20%. Mine are 18.5 or so. You can get older ones that are 17. But the thing to consider, at least for me, is yes, this panel might be more expensive, and it might even be more expensive per watt, but you have all of those, the other fixed costs of my mounting my rails, my AC install, the feet and all that attached. So if I can get a little bit more power for a little bit more cost in the same footprint, it might actually be cheaper total per watt to buy the more expensive panel, within reason. That was just kind of something that surprised me. The other thing with it, a lot of what panels are rated at is using the STC rating, which is the standard test conditions. This is a lab condition, 1,000 watts per square meter of sunlight, quote unquote. This is what we're gonna think we can analog to sun. But that's not probably what you're really going to get in the real world. So they can have the different test conditions. The PTC, it's the PV USA, or the photovoltaics for utility scale application test conditions. I just call it PTC, but it's closer to the real world. It's maybe what you're more likely to see. My panels are 310 watts STC at about 91% PTC. So even though they're 310 watts rated, and that's what I'm installing on my roof for my 7.4 kilowatts, I'm more like 6,900 after you multiply it by 0.9. What really surprised me is you start looking at dollars per watt. If I consider a cheaper panel setup that has lower efficiency panels because they're the same size at STC, but they're $1.35 per watt. That's a better kit than what I bought at roughly $1.48, just using kit prices here, for my 315 watt panels. But the PTC versus STC ratio of theirs is about 75%, mine's nearly 92. Well, my dollar per watt for the cheaper panels, once you factor in the PTC rate, is actually more expensive than the quality panels. And so when utilities are installing lots of panels on a solar farm scale, they rate everything at PTC. They don't use the STC number, because to me it doesn't mean a whole lot. Yes, that's what you're actually putting up on your roof, but are you ever going to really even see that? I have a 7.4 kilowatt system. I expect to maybe on my best days get 6,900 or 7. If I see 7.4, I'm going to be astounded. I just don't believe it's actually going to happen, except for a perfect day for 15 minutes. Going back to the other panel considerations here, you can get, most of the cheap panels are just straight aluminum clear coat, so it's silver. You can get a little more expensive where you can get black aluminum rails that go on it for aesthetics. And then you can get ones that have a black backsheet that it's black on black and it just kind of blends in where you don't see the cells, and maybe it'll blend into your roof line better, make your neighbors happier, make your significant other happier. If I ended up doing that, it's slightly less efficient with the black backsheet. I don't understand why. I'm thinking maybe light reflection or something, but what? So it's the temperature coefficient? So I lost a little bit of efficiency with it, but for aesthetics, I was willing to make that trade-off, and I just bought then a better panel to make up for that loss. So anodized aluminum with a black backsheet to just have a little bit of aesthetic consideration. You won't find black on black in the larger panels just because they're more utility scale, is 72 cells. Component considerations. With the inverter, you have a couple different ways you can go about this. The old school way is what they call just a string inverter. All of the panels are connected up in series. You can think of them like batteries all hooked together. If you get one bad panel, it's like having one bad AA in your kid's toy. Which one's bad? And all of them are affected. Well, you have shading factors to consider. Is that tree blocking a few of my panels? Is there snow on them? What's that going to do if I get some of my panels cleaned off? It doesn't help me because this other one's completely a dead circuit and I get nothing. So then the next newer thing with that is optimizers on inverter. All the optimizers are more in a string, and the panel is in parallel to that optimizer to put power into it if it can. So you have all the same current, but one can contribute more voltage than the others, such that you don't have that dead dot, that dead spot. And there's other safety things that go with that the DC to DC optimizers can shut down at the panel so that I don't have a live circuit. Because when I put the panel up there and there's sunlight on it, I have voltage out. But with the optimizer, if it can't talk to home, it's not putting out more than 1 volt, so you have a safe operating voltage. It adds a little bit of cost because now I have another component with my panel and I have my inverter, but it is more efficient. And I really like, we had snow the other day. I cleaned off a few of my panels and some melted off. Some are producing power, other ones are totally dead. You wouldn't have that with the string inverter system. And then finally, there's the microinverter, which directly converts to AC at the panel. And then you don't have high voltage DC running around. DC is kind of scary. It likes to arc and other things. Lower cost entry, you don't have a big inverter hooked up somewhere else. But to me, the low cost of entry, when you scale out, it's more expensive because the microinverters are more than the optimizers. So there's kind of a crossover point. And then I've also heard anecdotal evidence as far as the reliability of them in the temperatures of Minnesota. Even though I found that the optimizers and the microinverters had the same approved temperature range, I've just heard from other people that inverters don't like Minnesota weather, or microinverters. So then, how do you get on the roof? You have rails and your roof attach. I went with Iron Ridge. They seem to be one of the premier ones there, but it comes down to how much does it cost how far can it span, what kind of snow and wind loads can it take, and the further it can span, the fewer attach points you have. You know, if I can go 8 feet between attach points, it's going to take a lot less than if I have to put it on every truss of my house at every 2 feet. How easy is it to install? These all manufacturers seem to have taken a huge leap where really I needed a socket wrench. And all of the grounding is kind of handled through the hardware. I don't have to make extra ground points. So you pay a little bit more, but you don't have to worry about every panel being grounded to the rail and getting the rail grounded to the other rail. The quality system just took care of that. And I've got some stuff in my bag that I can show people after the presentation. Also with considering rails, the longer the section, the cheaper, because they all abut to each other. So if I have little 2-panel sections, it's going to cost me a lot more than 8 panel rows because they all share an inner bolt, and I can cantilever my end overhang points, so I just have fewer attached the longer that my runs are. Roof attach. It always scares me drilling holes in my roof. And so I wanted a good system this is supposed to last 25 years. I really don't want my wife going, what's that weird color on the ceiling? Oh, it's that darn solar you convinced me to do. So will it last? Will it leak? Will it last 25 years? And I ended up mixing the components for my Iron Ridge versus my snap and rack flashing, because the Iron Ridge I thought had a very good rail system and I like their design, but I like the snap and rack flashing better because it didn't rely on a rubber gasket for making a waterproof connection to where the hole in my roof is. It used some gravity because the attachment point for where the foot attaches is different than the point where I drilled into my truss. And the point for where I intruded my roof is uphill from where I attach my foot. And that gave me a lot of comfort. So that's why I ended up going there. And then when you are using stuff, if you're doing this, make sure you think about what hardware you're attaching with. I messed up and I needed to get some different hardware. And I started looking at the hardware store, and all I could find was galvanized. And I had a hard stop because galvanic interactions. Is this going to have an anode-cathode interaction? Yeah, that might not matter for 5 years, 10 years, but 25 years out, is this a battery, and am I losing my rust resistance because these dissimilar metals? Pay a little more, use stainless steel everywhere. Do my mouse. All right, regulations. I am not a qualified installer. I am not a professional electrical installer, so I can't speak to these all that great, but NFPA and National Electric Code do have regulations around these. It'll be part of, if you do a permit, it should get covered, but a couple simple things. All the high voltage DC, they're 400 volt circuits and up. It all needs to be in metal casing. It has to be rapid shutdown compliant, such that if it loses power or you turn it off, you can de-energize that high voltage system on your roof, and that it doesn't feed power back to the grid. So if somebody shuts you down upstream, you don't try to power up to your neighbors and electrocute a line worker when they think the system's down. But most of that should be handled by equipment you install, not directly your installation. So that's all taken care of by my inverter. City ordinances. I did look up Rochester's. There are rules on how far your solar can be from your neighbor's property lines. I was going on my roof, so I don't remember them because I didn't look that closely. Walkways on roof, so can the fire department get where they need to go if they need to ventilate your roof in the case of a fire? Distances from the peak of the roof. You can't overhang your peak or to the side of your roof. And then setbacks from the front. Well, if you have solar installed right on the front of your roof, you get snow and it starts melting off, you want to hit the roof and not the people underneath it because you're going to have sheets of snow sliding off. So I think it's 6 inches back, but not terribly hard to comply with. Covenants that are going to vary neighborhood to neighborhood. My neighborhood is old enough that it doesn't have a covenant relating to solar, though it does have a covenant. So there are some in Rochester, I've been told, that do not allow solar on the front of your house. Other ones allow it in the back, but it was not an issue for me. I did just make sure I checked into that before I did it. Back to the labeling. I'm going to get into that on the next slide here. Surprising number of warning labels you have to put on the system. Thankfully, there's kits for this to say, hey, look, if you turn off the breaker, that doesn't mean there's power is gone. This is high voltage DC. This is where you turn it off. There's kits out there that cover National Electric Code 2017, which is the last time they visited this, but it was just a lot of stickers. Just took me some time to go around and put them all on, but it's something you definitely need to consider for safety. I almost didn't get my meter installed because the guy said, you don't have the right label here. I'm like, wait, don't walk away yet. Let's see if I have a spare in the garage. My paperwork. So my building permit, electrical permit, and then I had a utility generation agreement. So your electrical permit, we'll start with building. It's mainly, how are you going to mount to your roof? Can your roof take the additional load and are the panels going to take the load for the snow? So my panels attached to my roof, I think adds 2.6 pounds per square foot. It's essentially a trivial amount against my trussed roof. I only have one layer of shingles up there. If I had a second, they wouldn't let me attach to it. So snow and wind load, honestly, I think the panels are probably stronger than what my roof is, as far as they have 110 mile an hour wind rating and a 50 pound per square foot snow load. Plenty strong. Electrical permits, I actually have my inverter in my garage that takes the DC power on the roof to the AC is also a car charger now, so I had to do a load calc. But like I said before, you're backfeeding into your panel, so are you going to overload the bus in your circuit board or in your circuit panel? And for that, they allow you to 20% over what it's rated for. So if you have a 200 amp service and a 200 amp bus, you could actually backfeed 40 amps. Mine's a weird case. My service is less than my bus rating of my load center, so I can backfeed without even being over what my system's rated for. But if you're going to hook into like a small sub panel, you need to account for this. And I actually do hook into a sub panel in my garage and then go to my main panel. And that sub panel also had a larger bus than what I was feeding it with, but I did have to use more than what it was rated for. And then there's rules on where you can place your breaker in that panel when you backfeed. Disconnects, you need to have DC disconnects. You have to have an AC disconnect within 10 feet of your panel, yada, yada. There's a lot of things there, but they're not, you can find lots of resources on it, and it's not that scary. Just take your time in approaching it, and the guys at the building safety department will correct you if you're wrong. It only took me 2 tries for mine, and that was because we had some miscommunication. The utility generation agreement. With RPU, they have a simplified process, and I think they're trying to simplify it statewide for how do I connect my house to the grid, and how do we agree on what you're going to pay me and how I get my energy. Really, by the time I got through building safety and building and electrical, RPU was just like, hey, you have to have labels? I'm like, yeah, I just didn't put it in my diagram because it was getting too full. So this is actually my house here. My meter on the side, my AC disconnect for my production meter is on the other side of the house. They had me have a map that shows where it's at my main meter. It goes from my inverter all the way outside my house to my sub panel, to my main panel, to my inverter, or to my meter. But I know another guy I'm talking to, he's just gonna go straight from his inverter to his main panel. He doesn't have his panel in the middle of his house, so it makes his life a little easier. This is my line diagram that I actually used for submitting my electrical permits. So it shows my 15 modules and my 9 modules that connect into my inverter that happen to have my disconnect. I have an outside disconnect before my production meter for generation goes into my sub panel, goes into my main panel, and goes out to the grid. It looks like a lot, but you start getting into it, and I can assure you it's not that scary. And you can find people that will help you with it. For my installation, it should have taken me 2 weekends with about 2 people. I have children, I have other things going on in my life, so it wasn't, I'm done in 2 weeks and I'm all set. But total time actually working on it, not counting permits and that stuff, but have parts and I want to put in, I'd call it about 8 person days. I bet you a pro crew can knock this out in 2 days with a couple guys and they're out and done. I started doing my AC electrical because that's when my parts showed up first. Did my roof and rails, put the DC wiring on it, mounted my panels. You get to the panels, it took me 3 hours. Once I had everything else in there, set them down, I was done. It was amazingly simple once you get everything else set up. The tools, it really doesn't take anything special. Tape measure, chalk line, hammer, drill, caulk gun, wire strippers, saw, and a torque wrench and a ladder. It's not rocket science. I think people try to scare you and say, pay me to do it, and don't think about this. But I tried thinking about it. I was like, what else did I need? And it shouldn't be that hard because people have put a lot of engineering resources into making sure it's easy once you go do it. This is my garage for, the white box is my inverter, the black box is my sub panel. My inverter is right next to my load center, but there's about 60 feet of wire between those two because I had to get outside the garage so that the electric company could have a disconnect that they could turn off if for some reason they thought I violated our generation agreement. So that was just a lot of work for what I deemed not all that interesting. Inside you use non-metallic wire. It's like hooking up a really big dryer, but it's producing power instead of consuming power. It's about the gauge of wire you're running. Because it's AC and it's a non-metallic like Romex, it doesn't need conduit. but the inverter has to have a AC disconnect within 10 feet. Well, they're right next to each other. Lost my clicker again. Outside, I like my nice Menards bag there because I don't have a meter in there yet, so I didn't want an open circuit for birds to go climb in, but have some conduit that comes out and goes into a meter socket that has an AC disconnect. This, like I said before, is on the other side of my house, so I had to put a map at my main meter to say, hey, if you're coming here to disconnect my house or work on this, be aware there's something else that's producing power back in. This meter socket theoretically should keep track of how much power I'm generating. Like I said before, my inverter in my garage though is actually a car charger, so I was arguing with them that this isn't needed because it will always be wrong. As soon as I plug in an electric car, I will be having negative generation, which seems backwards. But there's also I have a phone app to my meter. I don't need to go look at that. I can look at how much solar I'm producing right now and how much I've produced this month from my phone, but that's to satisfy RPU for reasons I argued with them about but got nowhere. Installation. So snap the chalk line like you're doing landscaping. Pull it, measure where you want it to be, snap the line, start drilling, and if you can see down here behind this peak here, there's a little piece of silver. That's actually what the foot was for mine that screws into the truss with a 4-inch stainless steel lag bolt. And you caulked around that, and then this flashing slides up under the shingle, and you bolt your foot to that. I tried to use a stud finder on the roof, had mild success. It's actually easier just to bounce a hammer, and here were the thud changes. Drilled some holes with some big long lag screws, put roofing compound around it, screwed it in, torqued it to spec. Not that hard. Covered with the flashing and repeated down the line I go. I think I put 48 feet on my roof. And once you got the hang of it, didn't really take that long. I've got 48 inches between my roof flashing. That's just kind of where what I thought was a good compromise between lightweight rails and heavy duty rails. A lightweight, you had to do them every 2 feet. Heavy duty, you could go 8 feet, but it's kind of what's your cost trade-off. Next thing, you bolt your rails to your feet. And really this was super quick, and it looks like a lot of progress because you get the rail up there and it's one bolt at every foot, and mine had a channel in it it's a square head, so you only had to bolt on the one side. You didn't need 2 wrenches, torque it to spec. My top row is actually longer than the rails they'd ship me, so it's spliced 17 and 14 feet. There's 2 screws on either side to make a strong union, and I'm really happy with how it looks right there. It just seems so clean for a DIY. Added some splices, and next you install your optimizers. So the optimizers are now the silver squares you'll see up there. That's what's doing the DC to DC conversion for the efficiency. And then also, if those can't communicate with my home module, they output 1 volt. The most optimizers I can have in a string is 24, so I shouldn't exceed 24 volts here. Generally, I think the consensus is about 48 volts is where you go from safe voltage to dangerous voltage. So this is like 2 car batteries wired in series when they are not able to communicate with the inverter. So relatively safe voltage, even though a panel would put out much more, these are your safety choke point. I pulled the PV wire up to the silver flashing there and wired it into all my optimizers. You organize your cables and pull them up to your rails. I ran unterminated cables, so I had to make a few crimp connections at the end. I ended up only having to make 4 connections on the whole thing manually. Rather than pulling terminated wire with cable heads already on it, it's much easier to pull it unterminated. And you also have to ground all of your rails for safety. And then I did a little bit extra for lightning protection. It used to be in electrical code. It's not anymore in the National Electric, but I felt I have a lot of metal up there. I'd rather have it well grounded without having to go through my equipment ground. I went straight to my house ground. Let's see if I can get the next one here. So, like I said before, once you get all of that done, which isn't really all that much, the panels go up incredibly quickly. You have to have a set of bolts on the end, and then all the spines between. There's just 2 bolts between each panel. And you use a drill with a socket end on it, and you go down, and it's about as fast as you can carry the panels there. It's more work to get the panel on the roof than it is to screw it in. And then they're just quick connectors that click into each other, and Loctite, I've got some in my bag, and I can show you how simple the connectors are. But worst case scenario, you have 4 bolts. If you have just 1 panel you put up, the interior row share bolts, and you torque it to spec, and you're done. It's really quite easy. So that is what this is my main house roof here on the left. Wasn't sure where this peak was going to lie when I was doing it, so I just left myself a little bit extra room. And then over here you can see my garage roof as well. They're on 2 separate strings, so the back ones are 15 panels, the front's 9 panels, and for a total of 24 panels. As far as inspections go, I made a little bit of a mistake here. I called when I had all those rails up to say, hey, come out and take a look, and went for building inspection. The guy shows up at my house, calls me from his car and goes, oh, you don't have anything up I need to see yet. I just need to see it when it's done. Well, turns out he's speaking on terms of the building inspection. The electrical guy instead wanted to see all the electrical stuff as I did it as a rough-in, so he had to come back and check it again after I had everything up. But electrical inspections need a rough-in inspection. That's when they approve you to get your meter put in, so you could actually start producing power at that point if you pass rough-in. And then when everything's said and done, you get a final inspection, just like if you're doing any other house electrical project. It's like doing a light switch, but much bigger wire. Building inspection, he only needed a final, and I don't know if he's gonna get in trouble for this, but the guy didn't even get on my roof. He looked at my permit, asked me a couple questions, looked there and goes, that looks pretty good, all right. I mean, it was astonishing, but it's straightforward. It's a couple bolts into some trusses. I mean, if you can shingle your shed, you can put electrical, or you can put solar panels on your roof. The utility, he came out for the meter set. It was actually, he did it after my final was approved just because I missed my rough-in. He put my meter in, and I go, do you gotta pull it back out to make sure all the safety stuff works? And he goes, I got 30 other installs I gotta do today. That's all on the equipment he installed anyways, I'm taking off. And so then I initialized my meter, and it's been running ever since, but the utility could perform some safety stuff such as putting your meter in, letting your inverter fire up, see if it makes power, pull it out, make sure it stops, and then if they put the socket back in, it's not supposed to fire back up immediately. It's supposed to wait a certain period of time. I think it's 5 minutes. Though I did have to have a couple of comebacks on my inspections. This picture here shows, they call it a solar mast header. It's just where the watertight conduit meets and terminates to the wires. And I didn't have that in there initially. I couldn't find it, didn't know what to call it. So that was, he had to come back for that. Otherwise, he just wanted to see, do you have good grounds? Do you have your cables organized? Because you're gonna have snow going by these things. They're gonna be up there a long time. Get your cables up off your roof so that they don't catch and drag down with the snow. Everybody likes a retrospective. What did you do wrong? What could you have done better? I mentioned before, I mixed my rails with my feet. And in doing that, that was actually, I liked the idea of it. I didn't check the size of my hardware that goes with the two of them. So one uses 3/8 and one uses 5/16. And even though it's only a 16th off, you can't really get a 3/8 bolt through a 5/16 hole. So it took me a little bit of time to end up milling out 48 feet that attach. I got a new mill set though, and my wife really couldn't tell me no. So we're in $50 later, and my drill press I had and got that fixed up. I should have used a Iron Ridge L-foot or a Unirac L-foot. That would also have been 3/8, but the solar supplier sold me the kit for the foot and the flashing, and I was like, oh, well, that's a better price. So just a little oversight. When I placed my first row of bolts, snap the line, drill the hole, go to put them all down and go to slide the flashing up under, the flashing hit the row of nails behind it because I got them too close together. So I had to trim about 1 inch to 1/2 inch of my flashing off to get it up under there. Learned that after the first row and didn't make that mistake afterwards, but I wanted to make sure I had it far enough up there. I got it too far. So just kind of a mild nuisance and a little bit extra work. After I got all my panels up there, I measured it and I could have fit 3 more. I plan on correcting that next spring, but I didn't want to order more than I could fit, so I played it safe, but I'd like to get more if I could. Most of the work I did, I used flexible conduit simply because it's easier to maneuver around. Used 3/4 inch conduit. It fit the table fill ratings for how much wire I was putting through it, but it's really, really hard to pull like 50 feet of 6-gauge cable through flexible conduit. It just doesn't run well. So I probably would have used rigid or gotten some bigger flexible conduit, but I pulled it through and it was just irritating. And then I had a miscommunication and didn't do my electrical rough-in at first, which would have saved me a little bit of time. But otherwise, I feel like I thought it through pretty well and I didn't have other glaring oversight. Other things to consider that didn't warrant a whole slide. How old is your roof? If you're gonna do this and your system's gonna last 25 years, should you really do it on a roof over 10 years old? And the pro told me no. Well, my house was built in 2008, it's 2019. My roof's 11 years old. I did it anyways because I couldn't justify replacing my whole roof and I'd rather act now and do it. With that, How much I have attached to my roof and glued down is less than $300. So I just have to pull it off, let them redo my roof, or knowing myself, I might try to convince my wife to let me do it myself. And then I'm out $300 of sunk cost on these panels. Other things with my inverter, they actually suggest you put on more DC power than you can produce AC. I've got a 7 kilowatt system up there today. I think I got 1.5 kilowatts peak today because it was really cloudy. So they suggest oversizing 10 to 20%. You can actually go as high as 40, and if you get a perfectly sunny day, you'll just start clipping some of your power. You won't produce all of it. I like to shoot for about 9 kilowatts DC. If I put 3 more panels up on my 24 to 27 panel system, I'll be about 1,000 watts oversized. So I might clip on a good summer day, but I'm not too worried about it. Insurance premiums. You're gonna add value to your house by putting this up there. How much is it gonna contribute? I contacted my insurance agent. He asked me what it costs to have a pro do it. And he's like, well, that's what it is. It's like $80 a year. So don't even change my policy. Like I said before, my inverter is also a car charger. So instead of having 2 separate devices, one that converts DC to AC and another one that converts AC to DC, why not use the same one? I don't have an electric car yet, but I can get this in on my investment tax credit for my solar. So I bought a car charger when I did my solar install. And then if you want to go sell your house, you can go, hey, you can drive on the sun power, because if it's bright and sunny and my car's plugged in, I'm going straight from sunshine to my electric car. Kind of a neat thing. Considering maintenance. Really, I don't think you should have, there's no moving parts. You might have to clean them. You might have some infancy mortality of your electronics in the bathtub curve at the beginning, but that should be pretty quickly resolved. And then everything on my roof is warranted for 25 years. So I don't even think I have to get up there. If I have a failure, I think Solar Connection told me he'd gladly come out and fix it for me because he gets paid for moving his truck out there to replace a component that fails on my roof because it's under warranty. Probably won't wait for him, probably get up there myself, but could do it. Cleaning, you're gonna get dirt and grime up there. The rain should wash it away. You get snow up there. I wouldn't advise getting on your roof in the middle of the winter. It sounds like an accident waiting to happen, but you could consider doing some snow removal. I got a roof rake because now it's like I've been staring at this app and there's snow on my panels and it's all 0, so I got a roof rake. Another thing to consider that just I thought of talking to somebody before this is the pitch of your panels. Mine is attached to my roof. My roof is 7/12 pitch. It's about 30 degrees. Turns out that's about perfect for summer because the rough rule of thumb is your latitude minus 15 for your summer pitch, plus 15 for your winter pitch. So in the summer, I want about 30 degrees. In the winter, I want about 60 degrees. If you want to go non-parallel to your roof, it requires extra engineering analysis. I wasn't going to do that, so I'll take the little bit of energy or efficiency loss, but it just makes it a little bit easier. Other things to consider with this DIY, project timelines. This isn't like, I'm going to put a storm door on the front of my house. No, I have to order things online. You can get these at Home Depot, but they're not stocked in store. So you've got some project lead times. I was harassing people about my paperwork because I hadn't heard anything in over 10 business days, and it's like, have you even received it? Can you give me an acknowledgement? So paperwork took about a month, even with a little bit of pushing. And I didn't order anything until after I got my paperwork through to make sure I didn't need any additional components or this was actually going to happen. Component delivery, roughly 2 weeks, assuming they don't forget to put something in the box, which they did for me. So that added a little bit more time. But it's going to be a large amount of stuff that gets delivered. I think I got 1,700 pounds of equipment that ended up going on my roof or in my garage. We're talking lift gate service. This isn't the FedEx guy handing you your package. It's going to take a little bit of room in your garage. It was a large pallet, 4 by 6 feet, because we're talking 3 by 6 foot panels. And before you order, because of all that stuff, make sure you double check everything, because you don't want to get all your stuff together and find out, oh, I don't have anything to attach this to my roof. Well, I ordered that, they forgot to put it in the box. Let's wait another 2 weeks. This is actually my system laid out. If we go back to that earlier picture, this on the bottom is my garage roof, and in the back is my main house roof. My inverter communicates to my optimizer so I can see how much each of my panels are directly making for power. And then the pro guys were showing me, if you have a panel or an optimizer go bad, you'll actually end up seeing that you'll have a little bit less power on your panel. If we go back to this picture, my garage roof, I don't know if you guys can see it, but one of my panels is a slightly different color. It's a little bit more blue than black. and I can actually see that it has a little bit worse efficiency than its neighboring panels on my roof. I'm irked about it. I might move it to between my two valleys because they make less power because they get shaded morning and night, but that'll probably come when I or put more panels in. I'll open up that link here at the end if people don't have other questions, but then this is actually what my production looks like on my interface. You can see when clouds pass over, I lose some of my power. Ideally, this would just be a nice curve. I don't even know, I think I maybe lost power here. It must have gotten some really dense clouds on this day. And then it snowed this day, or it snowed here and it took that long to melt off. And this is the day I turned it on, but I didn't actually get it hooked to the web till later. But it's up, it's running, it's working, and so far I'm very happy with it. In the future, I really like the idea of what can I have for flush mountain that's directly on there? Why do I need to have two different service systems? I couldn't find any of these panels as far as a DIYer yet. They seem to be, you need a special license, or they're all a little bit different. You have to be a certified installer to do your own solar shingle roof. But it's coming, and maybe when it's time for me to do a new roof, my panels might become fencing privacy panels mounted vertically, and I might just put solar panels as part of my shingles. Like I mentioned before, use this information at your own risk. I am not an electrician. I'm an electrical engineer that works on computers. I just did this as a hobby DIY project, and your code is going to change by region, both all the way down to neighborhood level out of covenant, all the way up to the National Electric Code changes year over year, and Minnesota adopts it, I think 6 months after it goes into effect. But I do have some of my sources in here as far as, I did talk to the professional installers, and it was interesting to get the perspective. I started looking at kits, but eventually got to the point of, that doesn't get me exactly what I want, so I went into component suppliers individually. All these guys have tools for how you lay out your systems and how you get your engineering diagrams. I made an account at Iron Ridge, and it gave me all my info for what I need to assess my load, and they gave me the engineering diagram signed by a PE for Minnesota that I submitted with my application. Didn't have to do it myself. The labels I bought as a kit. Rochester Public Utilities has a pretty good page on their distributed solar rules, all the way from the sub 40 kilowatt system all the way up to your megawatt plus systems for how the paperwork to fill out. And I've got a spreadsheet out there of all my components I bought up until where I started forgetting things and I had to go back to Menards, but panels, optimizers, inverters, attach, etc. So that is everything I have. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to go over them. Otherwise, I do have my live feed. I can show you what my panels are producing and my spreadsheet of components. Thanks. Yeah, that's at the very beginning there. At bit.ly. Yep, that link works. And then you can kind of get to everything else you want there, but I think it's in a PDF form right now, but oops. So it's out there for anybody that wants to see it. Just bit.ly/Albertson Solar.
Chad, can you go back to the cost? So by doing it yourself, it is about half?
I'd say about 50%, yeah. My quote from Solar Connection was about $24,000. I'm at $12,000, which is $1.60 per watt, but I put a car charger in, which cost me probably about $800 extra for the inverter and the cable for the car charger. So otherwise it'd be right at about $1.50. And I have that it's linked in this presentation, but this is my component list here. And there is my cost with all my components at $1.60 and a half. And then after you put in your federal rebate, I'm at $1.12. Yep.
You implied that you did about a month's worth of research. And so you're really talking about 20 man days?
No, it's more incidental talking. My neighbor was interested in it. I started with, I found the kit. I'm like, I could buy this and put it on my roof. And then I started digging in, what's in this kit? Why did they choose that? Just generally over-analysis, because it was started as an interest to me, and then it turned into, maybe I should just actually go and do this myself. It's kind of like, I might do this project, or this is an interesting avenue, where's this field at? and that turned into, this applies enough to me, and that's a diversified investment is how it kind of turned out to that the numbers worked out. So no, I would, total, I mean, it probably took me another weekend of just kind of researching it and then answering my wife's questions, sleeping on it a couple nights before I'm going to sink $300 into permits and have a little bit of sunk costs to turn around and say, okay, throw that away, I'm not actually going to do it. Because it was about $100 for a building permit, $100 for a electrical permit, and $100 for the RPU intergeneration agreement. So it was kind of just milling it over time. Yep.
Could you speak to the way you hook these panels up on the DC side of things? Is it like many wires running to the
Yeah,
inverter? Or?
So I brought a couple different things here. They're all in a string, so they connect in series. All of those panels where there's 15 of them together, one wire to another wire to another wire, only one set of wires going up there and coming back, minus your grounding cable. And then they really just connect to each other. Let's see if I get this. With these little MC4 connectors that just plug into each other. So I put a 10 gauge copper stranded wire into this, crimped it, and then these just plug together and you're done. So one of these goes from each panel to the next and makes a big loop.
So you've got what voltage coming down to the end?
They are 400 volts. And so each of the panels, I think, outputs around 40 volts a piece. And so they would be higher than that, but then those optimizers regulate. And when I first commissioned my inverter, as it started talking to him, it says, okay, you can bring your voltage up, and it got to 400 volts. That's where it wants to operate for lower resistance. So if you have fewer strings in there, your optimizers are output up to 60 volts. If you have a lot of optimizers together, they have to run more current. And this is my chunk of wire here that actually I stripped off after I pulled it through. It's 10 gauge wire with a very heavy coating on it. It was surprising. This wire is thicker than my 6 gauge bare copper I pulled to my roof because of the coating. It's just a heavy duty cable. And I mean,
Sure.
Anybody that wants to see
this.
What?
What kind of current are you running?
I think it's about 10 amps, 10 to 11 amps.
That's what I was thinking. Okay.
It's not very high, but it's a lot of voltage.
Yeah.
And so everything had to be in metal conduit to arc prevent. Anybody else?
Hail. What's the deal with hail, and how does it relate to house insurance?
So, like I said before, I think the panels are stronger. I don't remember my specific panels, but I did see some that they can take quite a bit of hail. I mean, they're strong, but as far as your house insurance goes, I don't think they're going to give you a better rating. So like, say you have fiberglass shingles or steel shingles instead of asphalt composite, that can reduce your insurance, but my roof is not all solar panels, so while this region might not be damaged, the other part of my roof is going to be damaged by hail. My insurer didn't bring it up when I talked to him about it.
Got a little bit of time yet. Wanna bring up your live display?
So this is my system right here, and as you can kind of see, here's where the snow came in. You can break it down per day. Today was, I think, a pretty terrible day. So on my 7,000 watt system, I peaked out at around 1,500 watts, and I have a pretty ugly jagged curve there because we had all sorts of cloud coverage. Other days, I've had some pretty good amounts of power. And like I said before, you can come in here and you can see how your panels are doing. So this is my day breakdown of these panels. And I can actually switch that over and I can see the whole longevity of it. And this one down here is the one I was talking about where its neighbor's making 8.4 and this one's making 8.3. I think that's just a little bit of a manufacturing defect in that panel with a slightly different color. But it's a pretty cool interface, and this is actually public as well. You don't have to log into it. I published it for other people to see. There's, I think, 5 others in the region. I just searched on their website by the zip code. And there's some people systems that have been out there in public for the last 5 years that you can see kind of how their bell curve is going for power. It's kind of neat to see what you make in November versus what I'll hopefully make in June, July, because mine's terrible right now. It's cloudy, short days, and non-ideal sun angle.
The green box, what's the
That's my inverter. So some really big installations, there's ones out here that are public in California that are 3 megawatts. They've got 21 inverters or something like that. So you can kind of view it as a whole breakdown. And I don't know how the communication protocol goes between them, but I made this layout myself for the physical layout. There's a logical layout. My inverter thinks they're all a single string down the way, even though they come in together. That's another thing I just liked about buying this inverter is I can see, I'm data driven. I can see what I'm producing, and it's
So
kind of
that's
fun to look at.
that's the total you've made so far?
I'm looking at, at the month I've made 209
Okay, got it.
right there, and I can go down to a weekly, and you can even play back your clouds and see as your system lights up. And this is, like I said, it's public. I don't have a bit.ly URL that's all that great to look at for it, but if you get my presentation, it's a link in there. Just now I feel like I'm more seasonally effective, what's your SAD? Seasonally effective depression. It's cloudy, honey, I'm gonna have a terrible day.
We're losing money.
I have my father-in-law contact me, he goes, sun's out today, electrons are flowing. I'm like, yeah, it is. Other things, so I talked about how this attaches to the roof and why I went with this system. So this is what gets bolted into your roof, and the bolt goes through here, and then your flashing slides up under the shingles and sits here. Well, as you might know, water doesn't like to flow uphill, so I felt good. Other systems, the bolt hole that comes through the flashing is your attachment hole. This one has a little bit of separation that I don't like relying on rubber gaskets to keep water intrusion. I like gravity and steel and flashing. This is still cemented to my roof, but I don't feel like I have to trust a rubber gasket for 20 years or a little bit of caulk. I just feel like gravity's not going to change by then. Well, we've got time. If anybody wants to come up and take a look at this, the cable man, I don't have any extra rail because I was supposed to cut it off, but I think I can fit more up there. So these are the clips that hold the wires together. Just a couple stainless steel bolts with square so that slip into the rails to attach the rails to the foot. Grounding points. The attach is actually really neat to me. This is all that holds your panel on, and it's serrated on the bottom to cut through your anodizing to make an electrical contact. And then when you're on the end, you snap it into this such that you don't have a panel next to it, so it sits on your panel here and compresses that side. And then the one in between just goes in, and it's a socket wrench or a drill. And like I said, I had to make 4 crimps to pull my wires through with the only special tool I really didn't buy in BioAlarm here. It's like $20 on Amazon for a crimp. So it's pretty straightforward in my opinion. The permits was actually the most of the work. The install was, once I figured out to do the permits, the install was easy. Yep.
How do they measure the power that you generate? Do they read your meter outside, or you tell them
So
how you communicate?
I had that discussion with them because they wanted to put in a generation meter on the outside of my house. Right. And I said, this is going to be inaccurate because I have a car charger that this isn't only going to be a feed. And so what they actually measure is they replace the meter that comes primary into my house, and it has 2 different readings on it. It has delivered and received. Okay. And so it's when it's dark and I'm running appliances, I receive power. When I'm producing more power than I'm using, whether I'm not home or it's just very sunny, they receive power. And at the billing cycle, it's what did I get, what did I give them, subtraction, that's how many kilowatt hours you used. If I overgenerate, they pay me for that delta. And until it snowed, I was a couple ahead. And then it snowed and I was behind, and I was like really behind, and I'm catching back up, and I'm off by about 50 now. I'm about $5 behind on that difference of math. And that was actually, I showed that on the other slide here, my meter. Instead of just showing your power received, has 2 different, there's 2 different numbers here. They're hard to see, but they installed in October and I didn't turn on until November. I had received 605 and I delivered to them 106. So it's about, and when I powered on, the day it turned on in November, I was at 444 they had given me. So I'm about 50 behind when I took those pictures. But 1 meter, and that's the net metering here is, it's plus or minus. It's not like a 2-direction feed. You can get a completely separate meter such that you sell them back everything you make, and then so they're just completely separate. You don't mix at your main load center, but it to me is more overhead. If you had a really big system and you couldn't put it as a backfeed breaker because you'd overload your main bus in your panel, then you would attach either before your panel or directly feed around your meter and have a separate meter. But I do have 2 meters, and they said they wanted to see how much I was producing for telling their supplier. Their supplier apparently wants to know how much local generation they have versus what they're supplying directly to RPU. Yes?
You mentioned there was a problem with having them in serial, the panels, but yet you put them in serial.
So they aren't quite in serial though. The optimizers are all in serial, but the panel hangs off that optimizer. So all the optimizers have to run the same current, but they can vary their voltage, versus if the panels were all string connected to each other, one dead panel would kill my whole system. But the optimizers, it's a DC to DC converter, are connected together. So if one is just making almost no power, it can still flow the current without having to have the voltage to keep my system from being a open circuit. So the old style is the string inverter, and I have the optimizer system here. So the string inverter, kind of an older school, more traditional system, it's like all batteries in a series, and if you have one dead battery, you have nothing. But those optimizers, with how they get plugged in, they put the panel in parallel to them. So they are no longer in series.
One more?
Just, you mentioned like a snow rake or something like that, or someone else asked about hail. Just, you clean these things out. How comfortable are you that you don't, I don't know, scratch the surface?
So I didn't use, it's like a foam car brush is what I bought.
Okay.
I think it's called a snow plow, but I put it on the end of a long painter's pole, screwed it into the end of it, and it's like, I'm kind of like, think about it, I'm cleaning off my car, so I'm kind of treating it. But I've got a coworker that's had a system like this professionally installed by somebody else for 5 years, and she's like, once it loses its novelty, you just don't produce power. But she's like, I don't even look at my website, I haven't looked at it in months. It's just there, and I pay less for electricity. You just get used to it. But for me, it's new and neat and novel. It's like, it's a 0. I don't want a 0. But it took 3 days to melt off 3+ inches of snow. They're black, they're smooth. It's gonna slide off pretty good.
Well, if I can give one more round of applause for Chad.